In this section, we will talk through the various elements and components of a project finance deal, breaking them down in detail sufficient to understand the moving parts of the process. Now, who are the stakeholders in a project finance project? There's the borrower, or the special purpose vehicle or special purpose entity that we described earlier on. This is that company or entity that's created to hold the assets, to exist as the counterparty to the capital provider. There's the investors. Now, investors could be that capital provider. Often, that capital provider is a debt capital provider. Sometimes they're providing preferred equity or regular equity. Or in the case of solar or other similar assets that had tax credits, tax equity. In many cases, a key investor is the parent company who owns the SPV. This will often be the operating company or operating organization that would either be your company or your client's company. Then there are the lenders. These are those capital providers providing the main portion of money into the project. The project developer. This is typically your company or your client's company. The operating company that's putting this whole project together, that's the sponsor of the project, the designer of the project, and the organizer. Then there's the customer or the off-taker. This is the counterparty that is on the other side of that long-term contract that makes this whole project finance program work. So in the case of a solar facility, this would be the group that's buying the energy from the solar facility. It could be the grid, or it could be an individual who signed a long-term power purchase agreement just for the solar energy from that facility. There are public and private sector partners. The municipality in which an infrastructure project is located is a perfect example of a public sector partner. Then there are risk management organizations, which you can think of mostly as insurance, but there are other methods of risk management such as hedging. Provided here is a transaction diagram showing a typical project finance facility and all of the parties in it. On the top, in the left, there's a working capital provider. On the top right, there's a debt capital provider. In the middle, there's equity investors. The working capital provider, in this case, is providing capital to an operating organization that is out creating electric vehicle loans. Once those loans are originated, they're contributed over to the special purpose entity, where the long-term debt capital provider issues funds that can come back to the parent, the EV loan originator. Those loans sit between the SPE holding company and the customer. The revenue from those loans goes back to pay the debt capital provider and the loan originator. The loan originator, in turn, is dealing with electric vehicle dealers and manufacturers to make sure that those vehicles go right to the customer. And in this case, the vehicles are being delivered and paid for by the loan originator without the customer having to touch any of that money. Now, a bit deeper into the special purpose vehicles themselves. What are they for? Why are we using a special purpose vehicle? It is a risk mitigation mechanism. It allows you as a company to separate the risk of these projects from your corporate balance sheet. Importantly, it also allows the capital provider to separate these assets from your corporate balance sheet in such a way that if these assets have an issue or the special purpose vehicle has an issue, that capital provider or lender can come in and take control of the SPE without having to touch your operating business. It's an investment attraction tool for that reason exactly. The capital provider can come in and get comfortable that their money is going to a very controlled, very specific use, a project. When they understand that, they can be more comfortable contributing their capital to that project without fear that it will be used for other things. Also, it fits very well into a regulatory compliance framework. It allows compliance between the capital provider and the operating company to be very specifically focused only around what's happening at that SPE. Financials can be broken down specifically for that SPE, and also it gives a unit for tracking from tax purposes. So if there are other entities or other organizations that also are partnered with that SPE, you have one central unit from which to divide out all the information. Now, term sheets are an important part of securing the deal. Why do we use term sheets? Well, they save a lot of time and trouble in negotiating long legal documents. Legal documents and contracts themselves associated with project finance are time-consuming, long, involved, and rather costly. As far as the time and effort for setting up a project finance facility, it really is establishing those legal documents that takes the most time, effort, and cost. As such, having a good term sheet cuts down on legal costs, cuts down on negotiation, and cuts down on ambiguity. The contracts themselves put the entire agreement into practice. There may be many different documents, a loan agreement, a note, security agreements. All of those are separately and specially defined, and there's special legal counsel that should be engaged to work on these types of contracts. You don't want to work with a general purpose lawyer for project finance purposes. A little bit of time from the right lawyer can go a long way to get the contracts right. At the same time, you don't need to engage a project finance lawyer to do everything for all of your business around your project finance facility. It's good to get their advice, but most important is to get their perspective and close eye on the term sheet and the legal documents. On top of that, it's very important to have some type of underwriting and risk mitigation. Those documents and policies should be put in place well in advance of closing any type of financing facility. Very often, the capital provider will require very specific things in this area. It's good to utilize those and take those into account, but also think for yourself, what risks do you want to cover? What risks do you see as material? Thinking of this ahead of time, in the term sheet stage, or at the very least before closing the finance facility, will save you a lot of time, trouble, and headache.